Hello, I'm Keith with the Trombone Shop at Schmidt Music, back with another instrument review for you. And today I've got another classic vintage trombone that we haven't had come through the shop before. We've been here long enough where I've had any number of these real classic vintage instruments from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, etc. come through. I've been able to experience them, but this is a specific model I have not been able to put hands on, the Conn 40H ballroom model. This is an instrument I've certainly been aware of. In fact, I know that we've had one or two manufacturers that have certainly been inspired by this instrument, but I've not been able to try it until now. And so I'm really excited to be able to share the experience with you. So as always, I'm going to take a play on it. We'll talk about the experience afterwards. Today I'll be playing on my trusty S.E. Shire's Michael Davis Plus mouthpiece. I think it is safe to say that C.G. Conn, throughout much of its history, really the late 1800s through the 1950s and 60s and beyond, were one of the, if not the most innovative American brass manufacturer that we had. They had so many different models and ideas. They were the ones who were just always trying to push the envelope, trying to find the next idea, the next concept that's going to help propel the instrument forward. And I think the 40H ballroom model is a really great example of it. So this was a model that had a pretty limited production run, 1925 to around 1934. So this is actually, from the best I can tell, this is a 1925 model, so of that first year. And there are a number of things about this model that make it really unique. So first off, they called it the ballroom model because they were really building it with a lot of these these more traditional, what we want to be thinking about, the jazz orchestra, the ballroom orchestras type of playing at that time. So we're talking, whether we're talking hot jazz, sweet jazz, all of these different variants that we're seeing at this time, they were building this instrument to fit those kinds of settings. And so there's some really unique features that kind of play into that. So first off, it is a tuning and slide instrument. So actually just not long ago did a video talking about tuning and slide and the whole concept with this. Conn, of course, was one of the makers really kind of moving this idea forward. So the 40H features the tuning and slide setup here. And again, we already know, and you can go back to the previous video where we talk about what that's doing in terms of the airflow, the cylindrical versus conical nature of the instrument. So they're taking that and combining it with what they call their ballroom bell here. So maybe hard to tell, but the bell is pulled back significantly. I'd say at least a couple of inches from the usual placement of it. And the idea why they did that was to allow for easy mute usage, easy, putting in mutes, taken out, using plunger effects, wah-wah effects, etc. I think in the documentation of the era, they literally talk about that type of idea. But it's really interesting. Obviously, you can see when we hold it, it's significantly closer. So I get the idea behind that, but I think it does some really interesting things in terms of the airflow here as well. So with the tuning and slide, we're already creating more of a conical type of nature here, but I kind of wonder if by pulling the bell back, we're making this leg of the neck pipe even longer, thus creating even a kind of a more open, at least a more straight pathway for the air before we get to this, frankly, relatively wide kind of single radius bell curve here, bell crook. All of that combined with the fact that it's a 500 bore instrument, which, again, of this era, the early middle 20s and beyond, they weren't typically that large. We were looking at more 470, 480 instruments, and we really didn't see the 500 bore start coming more commonplace until, say, the 1930s and beyond. So all of that together combines in a very, very interesting blow. In the original documentation, the advertisements, Conn talks about trying to create an instrument that has a large, lustrous, full sound that can fill up and balance in these ballroom type of orchestras. And I've got to tell you, from the player's experience, I get a lot of that happening. It is the blow of it feels amazingly comfortable, at least for me. It feels like, really almost like a 508 instrument, which, given everything that's going on, that's maybe not surprising. It's a very open playing 500 bore, but at the same time, it really does have this wonderful depth core to the sound. And it certainly has projection. It is a 7-inch bell, 7-inch yellow brass bell, but it doesn't feel kind of as small, tight, and compact as I see with other bells of the size of this era. It carries, but it has a presence at the same time. And when I go through and push the dynamic, it certainly it brightens up to an extent. Certainly, we get a I don't even want to call it brilliance. There's a resonance, a shimmer. You get energy in the sound, but it doesn't get super bright and edgy and focused like we might expect of, again, this design concept of this era. It maintains a lot of this really kind of this balanced darkness to the point where I said, how would this work in classical settings? So I did a little bit of stuff I didn't include in the video, but I tried doing something like tuba mirum. For example, if we were playing in more of a period appropriate, orchestration for our late classical, early romantic period instruments, where if you had, the principal playing alto, maybe second would be playing small bore tenor, third might be playing large bore tenor, how would this work in that kind of setting? And I think it could be an absolutely wonderful instrument. Again, when I was going through those types of more classical approaches, it really naturally has some of that weight and heft to the sound. It remained really stable, and it carried through like we'd expect with a small board, but still with a lot of body to the sound. It's wonderful. It's a really, really interesting design concept. And again, from a playing standpoint, I felt it felt incredibly stable. I felt like I was really able to lean into the sound. The upper register slotted wonderfully. The extreme lower register gets a little bit stuffy. Again, how often are we living on there in these instruments? But the overall experience was absolutely, fantastic. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful design. And interestingly, I think it certainly brings to me some ideas of some of the later Conn instruments, like, for example, the 6H. It has a lot of elements of what I experienced with the 6H, except a little different. For me, the 6Hs are always just a little bit warmer, not necessarily diffuse in the sound, but there's a little bit more roundness around the outside. This definitely has more of a clarity around the edge of the sound, but it has a lot of that similar type of warmth to the sound, complexities to the sound that people who like the Conn small bores appreciate about them. So it's interesting to see a lot of this lineage, and again, to see kind of the inspiration for some of these other designs. For example, Roy Lawler offered what he called the ballroom style bell setup on his instruments when he was building them. And again, I think when I played those instruments similarly, it gave a similar type of blow to all of it. And as a nice side note, you get some really nice feedback as well. Having that bell closer to you, you do hear more of what's going on. And in this case, really lets me appreciate all of kind of the wonderful balanced warmth and lushness and response, everything that's happened with the horns. So I'm really glad that I had the chance to share this really unique part of the American trombone history with you. If you have any thoughts about what I talked about, maybe you've had a chance to experience this, other tuning and slide instruments, other Conn models of this era, please feel free to leave them in the comments here. We'd love to have you as a part of our community. You can, of course, if you haven't already done so, think about subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification button, hitting the like button on this video here, and you can always find the Trombone Shop on Facebook and Instagram. As always, thanks for watching.